Siona God, hello all. Osha Sahiya, good evening and Wado. Thank you for watching. This is day 16, part B of reading Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, an inquiry into values by Robert M. Pirsig. Lobachevsky assumes at the start that through a given point can be drawn two parallels to a given straight, and he retains besides all Euclid's other axioms. From these hypotheses, he deduces a series of theorems among which it's impossible to find any contradiction, and he constructs a geometry whose faultless logic is inferior in nothing to that of the Euclidean geometry. Thus, by his failure to find any contradictions, he proves that the fifth postulate is irreducible to simpler axioms. It wasn't the proof that was alarming. It was its rational byproduct that soon overshadowed it and almost everything else in the field of mathematics. Mathematics, the cornerstone of scientific certainty, was suddenly uncertain. We now have two contradictory visions of unshakable scientific truth, true for all men of all ages, regardless of their individual preferences. This was the basis of the profound crisis that shattered the scientific complacency of the Gilded Age. How do we know which one of these geometries is right? If there is no basis for distinguishing between them, then you have a total mathematics which admits logical contradictions, but a mathematics that admits internal logical contradictions is no mathematics at all. The ultimate effect of the non-Euclidean geometries becomes nothing more than a magician's mumbo-jumbo in which belief is sustained purely by faith. And of course, once that door was opened, one could hardly expect the number of contradictory systems of unshakable scientific truth to be limited to two. A German named Riemann, R-I-E-M-A-N-N, appeared with another unshakable system of geometry which throws overboard not only Euclid's postulate, but also the first axiom, which states that only one straight line can pass through 2 points. Again, there is no internal contradiction, only an inconsistency with both Lobachevskian and Euclidean geometries. According to the theory of relativity, Riemann geometry best describes the world we live in. At Three Forks, the road cuts into a narrow canyon of whitish tan rock past some Lewis and Clark caves. East of Butte, we go up on a long, hard grade, cross the Continental Divide, then go down into a valley. Later, we pass the great stack of the Anaconda smelter, turn into the town of Anaconda, and find a good restaurant with steak and coffee. We go up a long grade that leads to a lake surrounded by pine forest and past some fishermen who push a small boat into the water. Then the road winds down again through the pine forest, and I see by the angle of the sun that the morning is almost ended. We pass through Phillipsburg and are off into Valley Meadows. The headwind becomes more gusty here, so I slow down to 55 to lessen it a little. We go through Maxville, and by the time we reach Hall, are badly in need of a rest. We find a churchyard by the side of the road and stop. The wind is blowing hard now and is chilly, but the sun is warm, and we lay out our jackets and helmets on the grass on the leeward side of the church for a rest. It's very lonely and open here, but beautiful. When you have mountains in the distance or even hills, you have space. Chris turns his face into his jacket and tries to sleep. Everything is so different now, without the Sutherlands, so lonely. If you'll excuse me, I'll just talk to Chautauqua now until the loneliness goes away. To solve the problem of what is mathematical truth, Poincaré said, we should first ask ourselves, what is the nature of geometric axioms? Are they synthetic a priori judgments, as Kant said? That is, do they exist as a fixed part of man's consciousness independently of experience and uncreated by experience? Poincaré thought not. They would then impose themselves upon us with such force that we couldn't conceive the contrary proposition or build upon it a theoretic edifice. There would be no non-Euclidean geometry. Should we therefore conclude that the axioms of geometry are experimental verities? Poincaré didn't think that was so either. If they were, They would be subject to continual change and revision as new laboratory data came in. This seemed to be contrary to the whole nature of geometry itself. Poincaré concluded that the axioms of geometry are conventions. Our choice among all possible conventions is guided by experimental facts, but it remains free and is limited only by the necessity of avoiding all contradiction. Thus, it is that the postulates can remain rigorously true even though the experimental laws that have determined their adoption are only approximative. The axioms of geometry, in other words, are merely disguised definitions. Then, having identified the nature of geometric axioms, he turned to the question, is Euclidean geometry true, or is Riemann geometry true? Riemann, I feel like it's Riemann, Riemann. He answered, the question has no meaning. As well ask whether the metric system is true and the avoir dupois, AVOIRDUPOIS system is false, whether Cartesian coordinates are true and polar coordinates are false. One geometry cannot be more true than the other. It can only be more convenient. Geometry is not true, it is advantageous. Poincaré then went on to demonstrate the conventional nature of other concepts of science, such as space and time, showing that there isn't one way of measuring these entities that is more true than another. That which is generally adopted is only more convenient. Our concepts of space and time are also definitions selected on the basis of their convenience and handling the facts. This radical understanding of our most basic scientific concepts is not yet complete, however. The mystery of what is space and time may be made more understandable by this explanation, but now the burden of sustaining the order of the universe rests on facts. What are facts? Poincaré proceeded to examine these critically. Which facts are you going to observe? He asked. There is an infinity of them. There is no more chance that an unselective observation of facts will produce science than there is that a monkey at a typewriter will produce the Lord's Prayer. The same is true of hypothesis. Which hypothesis? Poincaré wrote. If a phenomenon admits of a complete mechanical explanation, it will admit of an infinity of others, which will account equally well for all the peculiarities disclosed by experiment. This was a statement made by Phaedrus in the laboratory. It raised the question that failed him out of school. If the scientist had at his disposal infinite time, Poincaré said, it would only be necessary to say to him, look and notice well. But as there isn't time to see everything, and as it's better not to see than to see wrongly, it's necessary for him to make a choice. Poincaré laid down some rules. There is a hierarchy of facts. The more general a fact, the more precious it is. Those which serve many times are better than those which have little chance of coming up again. Biologists, for example, would be at a loss to construct a science if only individuals and no species existed, and if heredity didn't make children like parents. Which facts are likely to reappear? The simple facts. How to recognize them? Choose those that seem simple. Either the simplicity is real or the complex elements are indistinguishable. In the first case, we're likely to meet the simple fact again, either alone or as an element in a complex fact. The second case, too, has a good chance of recurring, since nature doesn't randomly construct such cases. Where is the simple fact? Scientists have been seeking it in the two extremes, in the infinitely great and in the infinitely small. Biologists, for example, have been instinctively led to regard the cell as more interesting than the whole animal. And since Poincaré's time, and the protein molecule as more interesting than the cell. The outcome has shown the wisdom of this, since cells and molecules belonging to different organisms have been found to be more alike than the organisms themselves. How then choose the interesting fact? The one that begins again and again? Method is precisely this choice of facts. It is needful then to be occupied first when creating a method, and many have been imagined, since none imposes itself. It's proper to begin with the regular facts, but after a rule is established beyond all doubt, the facts in conformity with it become dull because they no longer teach us anything new. Then it's the exception that becomes important. We seek not resemblances but differences. Choose the most accentuated differences because they're the most striking and also the most instructive. We first seek the cases in which this rule has the greatest chance of failing by going very far away in space or very far away in time. We may find our usual rules entirely overturned, and these grand overturnings enable us the better to see the little changes that may happen nearer to us. But what we ought to aim at is less the ascertainment of resemblances and differences than the recognition of likenesses hidden under apparent divergences. Particular rules seem at first discordant. But looking more closely, we see in general that they resemble each other. Different as to matter, they are alike as to form. As to the order of their parts, when we look at them with this bias, we shall see them enlarge and tend to embrace everything. And this it is that makes the value of certain facts that come to complete an assemblage, and to show that it is the faithful image of other known assemblages. No, Poincaré concluded, a scientist does not choose at random the facts he observes. He seeks to condense much experience and much thought into a slender volume, and that's why a little book on physics contains so many past experiences and 1,000 times as many possible experiences whose result is known beforehand. Then Poincaré illustrated how a fact is discovered. He had described generally how scientists arrive at facts and theories, but now he penetrated narrowly into his own personal experience with the mathematical functions that established his early fame. For 15 days, he said, he strove to prove that there couldn't be any such functions. Oh, I just realized strove and prove, they're spelled virtually the same. One has ST and the other has a P. That is just really weird. So why isn't it strove, prove, right? English is just so difficult. That there couldn't be any such functions. Every day he seated himself at his work table, stayed an hour or two, tried a great number of combinations, and reached no results. Then one evening, contrary to his custom, he drank black coffee and couldn't sleep. Ideas arose in crowds. He felt them collide until pairs interlocked, so to speak, making a stable combination. The next morning, he had only to write out the results. A wave of crystallization had taken place. He described how a second wave of crystallization, guided by analogies to established mathematics, produced what he later named the theta fusion series. He left Caen, C-A-E-N, Cayenne, I'm not sure, where he was living, to go on a geologic excursion. The changes of travel made him forget mathematics. He was about to enter a bus. And at the moment when he put his foot on the step, the idea came to him without anything in his former thoughts having paved the way for it, that the transformations he had used to define the fusion functions were identical with those of non-Euclidean geometry. He didn't verify the idea. He said he just went on with a conversation on the bus. But he felt a perfect certainty. Later, he verified the result at his leisure. A later discovery occurred while he was walking by a seaside bluff. It came to him with just the same characteristics of brevity, suddenness, and immediate certainty. Another major discovery occurred while he was walking down a street. Others eulogized this process as the mysterious workings of genius, but Poincaré was not content with such a shallow explanation. He tried to fathom more deeply what had happened. Mathematics, he said, isn't merely a question of applying rules any more than science. It doesn't merely make the most combinations possible according to certain fixed laws. The combinations so obtained would be exceedingly numerous, useless, and cumbersome. The true work of the inventor consists in choosing among these combinations so as to eliminate the useless ones, or rather, to avoid the trouble of making them. And the rules that must guide the choice are extremely fine and delicate. It's almost impossible to state them precisely. They must be felt rather than formulated. Poincaré then hypothesized that this selection is made by what he called the subliminal self, an entity that corresponds exactly with what Phaedrus called pre-intellectual awareness. The subliminal self, Poincaré said, looks at a large number of solutions to a problem, but only the interesting ones break into the domain of consciousness. Mathematical solutions are selected by the subliminal self on the basis of mathematical beauty, of the harmony of numbers and forms of geometric elegance. This is a true aesthetic feeling which all mathematicians know, Poincaré said, but of which the profane are so ignorant as often to be tempted to smile. But it is this harmony, this beauty, that is at the center of it all. Poincaré made it clear that he was not speaking of romantic beauty, the beauty of appearances which strikes the senses. He meant classic beauty, which comes from the harmonious order of the parts, and which a pure intelligence can grasp, which gives structure to romantic beauty, and without which life would be only vague and fleeting, a dream from which one could not distinguish one's dreams because there would be no basis for making the distinction. It is the quest of this special classic beauty, the sense of harmony of the cosmos, which makes us choose the facts most fitting to contribute to this harmony. And is not the facts, but the relation of things that results in the universal harmony, that is the sole objective reality. What guarantees the objectivity of the world in which we live is that this world is common to us with other thinking beings. Through the communications that we have with other men, we receive from them ready-made harmonious reasonings. We know that these reasonings do not come from us, and at the same time we recognize in them, because of their harmony, the work of reasonable beings like ourselves. And as these reasonings appear to fit the world of our sensations, we think we may infer that these reasonable beings have seen the same thing as we. Thus it is that we know we haven't been dreaming. It is this harmony, this quality, if you will, that is the sole basis for the only reality we can ever know. Poincaré's contemporaries refused to acknowledge that facts are pre-selected because they thought that to do so would destroy the validity of scientific method. They presumed that pre-selected facts meant that truth is whatever you like, and called his ideas conventionalism. They vigorously ignored the truth that their own principle of objectivity is not itself an observable fact, and therefore by their own criteria should be put in a state of suspended animation. They felt they had to do this because if they didn't, the entire philosophic underpinning of science would collapse. Poincaré didn't offer any resolutions of this quandary. He didn't go far enough into the metaphysical implications of what he was saying to arrive at the solution. What he neglected to say was that the selection of facts before you observe them is whatever you like, only in a dualistic subject-object metaphysical system. When quality enters the picture as a third metaphysical entity, the pre-selection of facts is no longer arbitrary. The pre-selection of facts is not based on subjective, capricious, whatever you like, but on quality, which is reality itself. Thus, the quandary vanishes. It was as though Phaedrus had been working on a puzzle of his own, and because of lack of time had left one whole side unfinished. Poincaré had been working on a puzzle of his own, or I should say his own. His judgment that the scientist selects facts, hypotheses, and axioms on the basis of harmony also left the rough serrated edge of a puzzle incomplete. Don't go hang till we meet again. Love you, mean it.